Hi, I'm James Ellis, and welcome to a little project I'm calling The Next Step. Now, if you're in the talent acquisition, employer branding, recruiting space, you have already heard about this thing called AI, this little thing called ChatGPT, this little thing called, well, all the other AI tools that are out there. And right now, you are in one of two camps. You are super excited for all the crazy tools that you can buy and use and embed and plug in, or you're terrified. And I get both positions. I truly do. Talent acquisition hasn't seen a change like this in 30 years when the internet really kind of started to click. This is going to be a big change. In fact, according to a lot of people I talk to, we predict that this is going to be even bigger than the internet. Yeah, that's possible. For those of us who lived through the beginning of the internet, this is going to be crazy. The problem with AI is that it feels very, very big. It feels like we didn't warm into it. It landed on us like a big old rock, right? A big old boulder from on high. Now, I want to help with that. I want to help show how AI can solve your problems. I want to the real world problems, not made up problems, not kind of vendor demo problems, but more like, what are your real challenges? How do we solve them? So here's what I'm going to do. How do I get real world challenges? Well, funny thing about TA leaders and recruiters and employer branders is that we're a chatty bunch, and we like to go on podcasts and we like to talk. So for the foreseeable future, I will be looking at recent podcasts of talent acquisition leaders talking about their world, talking about their challenges, talking about what they've been doing, and identifying challenges and trying to show exactly how, if I was in their shoes, knowing what I know about AI, how would I solve their problems? And hopefully, you're going to get a lot out of that. Now, if this is interesting and you don't want to wait to be on somebody else's podcast before your questions and challenges and support get answered, you should always find me on LinkedIn. Just go find me and send me a voicemail and I'll see if I can answer your challenge, your question directly on the air or whatever we're calling this. Like I said, this podcast is called The Next Step. It's how I'm going to try my best to get talent acquisition leaders, recruiters, sources, and employer branders to take the next step into technology. And it's just one step. That's the thing. I don't want to reinvent this whole thing yet, but I just want to help you take the next step. So we're going to start with, this is a pilot project, so we're going to start in a safe way. We're going to start with a podcast from last year. And this is a podcast from the Talent Acquisition the Talent Acquisition Leader podcast. Really good podcast. I think they're about a monthly. And last year they had a great conversation with Mark Smith from Medtronic. And Mark Smith talked for, I think, 40 minutes or so about what they were doing and what was interesting. And what I did is I took a transcript of that podcast and I asked my friend Claude, perhaps you've met Claude, perhaps you haven't, perhaps you should, separate conversation. And I asked Claude, hey, based on this transcript, can you identify and or infer challenges Mark is having based on this recording? What does Mark need? What would help Mark today? And Claude did a great job. Claude came up with 5 things we're going to talk about. I'm not going to cover all of them. I think I'm going to talk about 3, and I'm going to talk about how we might solve those 3 challenges or resolve or support or ease, depending on how you want to see it, those 3 challenges using off-the-shelf AI tools right now. Now, just so we're all clear, I'm not selling anything. I'm not here to sell you tools. In fact, I went on to say that for the most part, I think a lot of the one-use, single-use type of tools, the unitaskers, if you will, of AI, they're not that great, right? Plugging AI into an existing tool set doesn't make that tool set AI. It really doesn't. So we're going to use a lot of big LLMs, your ChatGPTs, your Claudes, your Gemini, not Grok. I will not be talking about anything involving Mr. Elon Musk because no, will not be doing that. So if we ignore that, the other big LLMs, I know that Facebook has one and there are a couple of others out there, but we're going to try and talk about how do you use existing AI and ancillary AI tools. They're not specifically for recruiters or talent acquisition leaders to help them resolve their problems. Okay, cool, great. No sponsorship, no money being paid. I'm not getting a back end kickback or whatever like this. I just think we can help you, or we can use AI to solve some recruiting problems. So here are the 3 challenges that Mark Smith, based on his conversation on the Talent Acquisition Leader podcast, talked about. And by the way, if you are Mark, I hope this is useful. And if you know Mark, tell Mark. And if you're not Mark and you don't know Mark, but you think this is useful, You got to tell somebody. That's right. This is the pay. This is how you pay for this amazing content. If you think it's useful, you have to tell someone. That's how, when we all take this next step, we all get better. We all go farther. So please help me helping the industry take its next step by telling people about it. So let's talk about those specific challenges. So the first challenge is employer brand recognition. Now, in Medtronic's particular circumstance, they're a pretty big company. In fact, they're a pretty well-known company in a very, very particular market. And being outside that market, most people don't know them. Nobody swings by the store and picks up some Medtronic anything. Usually it's a situation where they're in a hospital and someone is using a Medtronic device or is giving them some Medtronic materials, and that's how it works. It's not a commercial consumer kind of product. Big company. In fact, there's a big branch far outside of Chicago, so I do know them a little bit. But otherwise, they have no brand footprint. They have no consumer halo, and consequently, it's very hard to engage people. And the problem is, according to Mark, is that when people do apply for whatever reason, and that's an open question as to why, those first conversations are kind of painful. In fact, he says it's a painful experience for 85 to 90% of candidates, because they just don't know what this company is and what they do. And when you have to spend so much extra time informing the candidates what your company is all about and why it's there, that really puts a lot of burden on the hiring managers and the recruiters. That's a burden they could be applying other places to do really good work. So how do we use AI to solve that? Well, that's a great question. So first off, we want to say there's a really good chance that a company like Medtronic, and I don't have inside information, I don't have insider knowledge. Mark, if you're listening to it, ping me if you have questions or you want to clarify anything. I'm always happy to learn. But I imagine somewhere there is some sort of employer brand message, meaning this is what the company is, this is what the company does, this is how the company does it, maybe even this is how the company rewards people, right? In my model of employer brand, it's all about helping people understand your mission, the day-to-day experience, and the reward. That's the really, really base level. Everybody needs to know that before they will say yes to a job, right? Rather than put that in the pocket of individual recruiters to have to carry that load, you want to extract that out and make it a bigger brand. That's kind of how employer branding starts to work. You take smart thinking from recruiters and move it up a level or two. Okay, so you may have some sort of formal or even informal employer brand. You may have even written it down. Do that. Please do that. That is super, super helpful. So what I would do if I was in Mark's position, I wanted to get more people to understand what the company was all about. I would say, let's take this employer brand and let's take, I don't know, a couple of investor letters. Yeah, investor letters, they're super powerful, especially a company like Medtronic, which if they're not public, they certainly have a lot of people investing in them. And so they have to publicize what they're doing with that money. This is how companies work, right? You can't just make a company and suddenly just do what you want. You are always beholden to your investors. So you have to tell them what's been going on, what your vision is, what the expectation is. And those pieces of content are gold. They are gold to help people understand what the company is all about. Maybe they're the public issues. If you are a public company, they have quarterly announcements and annual announcements. If you're not, you still might be putting that letter up. But having to explain to investors what the company is, where it's going, and how it's doing, that is part of the conversation. In fact, that might be one of the best distillations of what the company's all about, right? The employer brand might be a little soft and fuzzy depending on who built it or how you built it, but those letters to the investors, because there is moolah involved in that, they get pretty clear pretty quick. Grab those. Grab everything on your career site and everything on your corporate site, and grab anything else you can think of. I might think of things like, your onboarding documents. How do you explain the company to other people? Grab it. Dump it all into, I used the word dump it all into. Do you know that you can upload documents into most, if not all, large language models? You can say, yes, I know you've been trained on the English language and like a insane amount of information, insane amount of content, possibly not so legally attributed or accessed, separate conversation. But let me give you contextual information. Let me help you understand my company right now. That is what you're doing. You are uploading that document saying, okay, if you understand how to think, and there's conversations around if it's thinking, and that's a separate sort of situation. I am not a data scientist, so I'm not the person to answer that. But if you are thinking in a general sense, let me give you the information specifically on which to consider. So you upload all that information. You might say, okay, hey, if I'm trying to target an engineer. An engineer who has lots of options. Maybe they're an electrical engineer, maybe they're a mechanical engineer. I'm not sure what's being used here. I'm not sure what we're specifically hiring for, but those people have lots of different options. And some of those options are very well known, and Medtronic may not be one of them. But if you could say, here is all the information about what this company is all about. And then you say, here's the LinkedIn profile of the person I want to talk to. And you can say, how would I speak to this person about this company? What about this person's profile would be interesting to connect to what we do? Ask ChatGPT to say, how do I speak to this person? What is an outreach message that might engage this person? Now, I'm not going to give you the exact prompts because I think the exactness of the prompts is, I don't know, we can get real precious with this stuff. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to get so precious that you don't know that you can just go to Claude or ChatGPT and do this thing. And that is really what the next step is all about. Go do this thing. So what you would say is you've uploaded these documents and you will say, and I'm going to do it to Claude because Claude's my bestie. I'm going to say, hey, Claude. I actually don't have to say, hey, Claude. I say things like, I start with, I have uploaded documents about Medtronic. It includes letters to the investor, scrapes of the corporate site, scrapes of the career site, scrapes of the About Us page, and whatever documentation you put in. I said, I want you to review this material and get a sense of what this company is and does. Then I would like you to look at, boom, paste in URL, or scrape the page, the profile of the LinkedIn profile, and say, I would like you to look at this person and think, based on everything you know about this person, based on the content I just uploaded, what are the 3 things they should know about Medtronic that would make them, 1, super excited to learn more, and 2, might actually surprise them? Button. That's my way of hitting submit, or the Claude's case, it's an arrow. I don't know, whatever. There's no special effects here. This is a pretty simple podcast. That's it. Now, I'm going to say right now, and one of the overarching messages of using AI is that we have been trained by Google to write very simple search terms, right? We understand we've got no more than 10 words in a search term, and you don't put filler words in there. You just say Chicago, Italian food, Broadway, blah, blah, blah. Like you give it some sort of series of keywords and Google knows what to do with that. That's not how the LLMs work. In fact, I'm going to tell you right now, the first secret to better use of LLMs is to use a much, much bigger prompt than you think you need. Don't try and kind of, how do I keep this simple? Literally, the LLMs love bigger prompts. For my own work, for my own research work, I have a prompt that's almost 2 pages long. 2 pages long. That's just one thing I want it to do. I'm giving it limitations. I'm giving it constraints. I'm giving it context. I'm helping it understand what I'm trying to achieve with this stuff, what it should be looking for, what might be interesting, what won't be interesting. I'm giving it all the information I can think of to help it make better decisions, and it generally does. So that might be a first way of saying, how do I extend the brand recognition? Well, first off, how do you speak in those language? And I'd start with one profile, just as a tester. Start with one person and say, how do I speak to this person? And then you can kind of expand it out. What's really interesting about this model is it starts to help us get away from personas, which personally, I can see when they work and how they can help, but for the most part, that's only like in 5% of the cases. For the most part, since you're not hiring personas, you're hiring people, let's talk about and for and with those people. Let's use the content we have about those people to frame and decide what is useful content to have. For me, in my experience, employer brand is not about coming up with a cool tagline. It's about figuring out what does that person need to know to make them go, oh, that's interesting, because that's like the whole job. Once they go, oh, that's interesting, they want to learn more. And they're going to do everything they're going to have to do. They're going to go to the career site. They're going to Google you. They're going to do what the stuff. But until they go, oh, that's really interesting, they're not going to do any of that, no matter how easy you make it for them. So the goal is not to answer their questions. The goal is to kind of pique their interest and make them go, oh, that's the game. So that's where I would start. That's the first challenge. How do you increase brand recognition? Use an LLM to say, how do I speak to a specific individual based on the actual specifics of what my company does? All right. 2, balancing strategic versus transactional TA approaches. Okay, Mark says he wants to shift from being an order taker and having his team feel like order takers to being more strategic consultants for hiring managers. The hope is that this improves workflow and workforce planning rather than just focusing on time to fill metrics, which Bravo. I highly applaud that initiative and that thinking and that approach. The question is easier said than done, right? It's just, everybody wants to stop being an order taker, but I'm just going to say it. It's a lot easier to just be an order taker. You don't have to be as accountable. You don't have to do as much work. There's not much kind of riding on your back. But when you're strategic, when you're consultative, you got some skin in the game, and that's a little harder. Now, long term, you're going to be way better off for it. But I get it's hard to get the team to feel and be more strategic. So what do we do? Okay, well, there's a lot of things we could do, but I'm going to focus on one idea. What I'm going to do is say, I'm going to take my intake document. In fact, I'm going to pick one recruiter on my team. I'm going to grab their intake document. And let's be fair, most recruiters have their own. They got their own handmade favorite way of doing intake, and they got their handmade favorite way of doing outreach. They got their own way of doing, everything they do, job postings, right? They got their way of doing it, and they're not always open to new ideas. So what I would do is I would take one intake form, and then I would post it to the LLM and say, hey, review this intake form. Based on everything you know about how other recruiters recruit, other intake forms, what hiring manager is looking for. Oh, and I would also paste the specific job you're looking for. Based on all that information, help me identify ways to make this intake form better. Things to consider, other questions to ask, changes to the questions I'm asking. Is there information that if you had it, you could do better marketing with it? You'll notice this isn't a make better. This isn't a simple keyword. This is a complicated ask. I'm going to tell you right now, it works. Don't be scared. Give it a try. Make it happen. Type in that kind of prompt. Take it a step further. Ask Claude, ChatGPT, whatever. Ask, where would I take that? We are asking, what would make it better? What questions are being asked? How do you ask better questions? You might even say, what are some questions we can ask the hiring manager in this process that would help them see that this process is valuable? Interesting. Here's what's nice about LLMs. You can ask it really crazy questions, really insane, stupid, wacko questions. And yeah, you're going to get some hallucinations, but what's interesting is very often you get interesting ideas, things you would never have thought of. Now, I'm not saying it should redesign my house because it has a better sense of style or a bit more creativity than I do, but because it's coming up with all sorts of crazy things, if it lists 10 things, one of them might be amazing. It doesn't know which one's amazing. That's my job. I got to know, oh, that's a really interesting question. That's a really interesting change I might want to make. One trick for LLMs is feel free to ask for 7 answers or 10 answers. That kind of forces it to kind of keep going beyond the obvious sometimes. It's an interesting trick. One last thing. It would be really helpful if we could learn, not in general, but about what we're doing here, about the intake. And I might even say, let's go get an Airtable account. It's free. Or just use your Google Sheets account, right? Or, or whatever database or spreadsheet you have, right? And you're going to say, okay, here's the job. Here's the intake form I used. And then maybe you ask, how long did it take to fill those roles? And as you do this process, as you change the intake form, or only on certain intake forms make these changes, you can start to identify hiring managers that go through this improved intake form. Turns out they hire faster and better than people who don't. Here's the fun stuff about AI. We have been so trained to use what's called structured data, right? Everything's in a form, everything's in a field, everything's very structured. Think about the lines on your spreadsheet as like prison bars. It's very, very structured. You can give it an LLM instead, a couple of paragraphs, and it will figure out how to structure the data, which means you can grab stuff from lots of different places, stuff that you might have normally had to ask your nerd or developer geek to kind of say, hey, can you map these fields together? And they say, great, I'll see you in 3 weeks, and maybe it'll be done and maybe it won't. You can actually ask AI to literally do that, map these fields or find commonalities. Super helpful. So you can stop worrying about having to make all the data structured. You can use unstructured data. But what you can say is, I'm going to create my own structured data. I want to find out how each of these jobs is faring. And over time, you'll see very quickly if these changes aren't making a big difference, or maybe they're not. Or you'll start to realize, wow, when we made these changes, because we asked Claude, thanks Claude, to say what would make this intake process something that the hiring manager would be more engaged with. See if that has a change. You can kind of track that stuff. Once you do that, you want to reveal that information, because what's really exciting is once you see successes, you can't be quiet about them. You need to share. Recruiting is so often, I like to joke that most recruiters are cowboys and cowgirls out in the lone prairie doing their thing, and they are not generally communal folks. They don't always share what they know. But if you start to take all these different intake forms from lots of different places and lots of different recruiters and say, what's the best? Pick and choose. How does this work? If you can apply some very simple data to it, you can start to realize what really works, and you can make all of your recruiters better. That can make them more strategic. And when you start to show the hiring manager, hey, I'm not just asking you the same old, I'm asking you better questions. I'm asking you stronger questions. That's resulting in better ads and better social media content and better whatever, which ultimately leads to better hires, maybe even faster. That's the win. Here's the deal. In any situation, you're always going to have people who are super excited to jump in and play your little game, and people who, nope, no thanks. That's just life. And you will never convince the nopers on your own. What you can do is get the early adopters excited and have them talk to people in their space so that more of them show up. So you're talking to less of the earlier adopters, but the people willing to try new things, and not the people who are excited to try new things, but willing to try new things. And then you talk to a wider audience, people who will want to do the best way. And that's how you get these ideas across the whole spectrum. Okay, let's get to the third challenge, and that is building team capabilities. We live in a world where recruiters are expected to know a lot. I know in my last in-house job, recruiters were kind of expected to be biochemists and data scientists and engineers and all sorts of other stuff that, of course, they weren't. If they knew data science and if they knew biochemistry, they'd have different, possibly even better paying jobs. That's a separate conversation. But at the same time, they were expected to hire those people, to attract those people. Now, when a recruiter doesn't know enough about the function that they are recruiting for, what do? Well, they go to the old standbys. My favorite, we're hiring messages, which of course are worthless. So when we think about building team capabilities, in Mark's case, that what he says is he's focused on developing his team's capabilities to effectively communicate with different generations of talent and improving both candidate and hiring manager experiences. Okay. LLMs are perfect for this. Not because they're going to teach you a class, but because you can ask the questions. And what I might say, in Mark's case, hopefully, this makes sense. What he would do is say, okay, I'm trying to hire a biochemist, and biochemist is a good one because I really don't know what a biochemist is or does. I might go and say, hey, hiring managers, thanks, we're doing the intake, that's great. Hey, are there 3 or 4 articles that you would love someone who gets this job to have read? Oh yeah, sure. And when they're, the fact that you're excited and interested and want to talk on their level, they love that stuff. And they'll send you a couple articles. What do? Okay. Hey, Claude. Hey, how you doing, James? I don't know why he's got that voice. But you upload those articles and you say, this is the kind of stuff we like to talk about at our company. This is the kind of information we discuss on a regular basis. You might even go into your Teams or Slack channels for those audiences and see what are they sharing amongst each other. Grab a couple of those. No one has to know. So you grab a couple of those, you stick it up there and say, hey, Claude, this is the kind of information we like to talk about at our company. We are trying to achieve this. We're trying to do this, maybe a couple notes about your culture, just to kind of give it some context. Then you say, here are 5 candidates that we would love to talk to. And you give the LinkedIn profiles, or you just scrape it and copy and paste it. What I would say is, 1, please write a couple of sentences that I can use in the headline of a job posting that reflects that we care about these ideas, these complicated ideas. Because frankly, when I'm a biochemist and I may be on a job board or looking around, if I see the kind of nomenclature and vernacular that I'm used to on a daily basis in the headline of a job posting, that might be exciting. Now, that's a simple one. The really good one is when you say, hey, Claude, based on what you know about these 5 people, based on what you know about what we talk about, and maybe even you throw in some of the previous aforementioned content that we talked about earlier, you might say, do me a favor. I want you to write me a 5-email drip campaign. Here's what I need you to know. The first 3 emails have no call to action. I simply want to inform, educate, inspire, or, what's the third one? Inform, educate, inspire. There's another E. Entertain. Sorry, entertain. I-I-E-E. Come on, it's a good one. I want to inform, educate, inspire, or entertain an audience that looks like this. See LinkedIn profiles. All I want to do is show them kind of what this company is all about, what we do and what we talk about. The final two emails should have a call to action about this job. I gotta be in the frame, right? Don't I? There we go. In this job, you post the job and you update it. So again, you're giving the system so much context, and you don't have to know anything about biochemistry. You're giving it everything it needs to know so it can tell you what to write. You might even go so far as to say, feel free to use the same tone of voice as in that article. Interesting. It might be interesting. Maybe a bad choice. Play with it. Do it once with, do it once without. If you want to get crazy, throw it someone interesting. Throw it, hey, make it sound like Neil deGrasse Tyson. See what happens. That guy can talk. That guy is a great communicator. Wouldn't you like to be a great communicator too? Guess what? Now you can, especially in content that you know literally nothing about. That is where you start. And what I would do is I would take those 5 emails and just review them and maybe even double check your work. Take it to the hiring manager and say, hey, look, knowing that I know nothing about biochemistry, can you just give this a glance and see if there's anything insane that I think I'm saying, right? Where I say 2 + 2 equals bucket of chicken, just anything like that, and let them kind of be part of the process. Let them see the work you're doing to help speak to and engage those audiences. And over time, you start to build a library of this kind of content that really highlights your team's capabilities, that it can suddenly speak to different audiences. Hey, let's throw in generational. Hey, you are talking to a Gen X or a Gen Z audience. Feel free to add that in the context. We're trying to talk to someone who is 27, 47 years old, whatever that number is. Give the system context. Like I said, the prompts probably aren't going to be too long. So, 3 different ways AI right now can go make real impacts on Medtronic. So Mark, I hope this was useful. And if you are listening, thanks so much for listening. Holler at me. Let me know if this was useful. I'd love to hear if I was way off the mark or if you found this useful. If you're not Mark, and that's going to be most of you, just law of big numbers, I hope this was useful. If this is the kind of stuff you want to hear more about, point me to podcasts or just leave me a voicemail on LinkedIn. You can be, and your challenge could be on the next episode of The Next Step. This has all been brought to you by Employer Brand Labs, which is a company that is me. I am Employer Brand Labs. Employer Brand Labs is me. And this is the kind of stuff I do, using technology, using different thinking to get to quicker answers, better answers in a shorter period of time around employer branding, recruitment marketing, and talent strategy. Check out employerbrandlabs.com to learn more. Otherwise, as I mentioned, you are on the hook to tell someone about this podcast if you found it interesting. Your boss, your coworker, someone in your network, or all of LinkedIn. It's be fine too. Well, it's fine. It's fine. Thanks so much for listening. I hope this was useful, and I will see you next time on The Next Step.